The message arrived just after dawn on Boxing Day, when Chicago was still half asleep and the streets lay muted beneath a thin crust of snow. Let's spend today together. My treat. We deserve a fresh start. It came from Daniel Foster. For a long moment, no one replied. Linda Foster stared at her phone as if it had spoken out loud. Daniel's name, glowing on the screen, felt unreal, like seeing a ghost casually ask for coffee. She hadn't heard from her youngest son in nearly 3 years. Not since the arguments. Not since the money. Not since he had walked out of her house one winter night and never looked back. Now here he was, offering redemption in a text message. Across the kitchen table, her husband, Robert, 58, noticed her pale expression. "What is it?" he asked, lowering his mug. Linda slid the phone toward him without a word. Robert read the message once. Then again. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in disbelief. "Today," he said quietly. "On Boxing Day?" "Yes," Linda replied. "After all this time, today." Their daughter, Emily, 29, emerged from the hallway pulling on a sweater, her hair still damp from a rushed shower. "Why do you both look like someone just died?" she asked lightly. Linda hesitated. Then she said the name. Emily stopped mid-step. "Daniel?" "He wants to take us out," Linda said. "Says he wants a fresh start." Emily laughed, sharp and humorless. "Of course he does." Daniel Foster had always been the complicated one. Intelligent, charming, restless. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel seen, until he disappeared without explanation. He had borrowed money from Robert for a business that never existed. He had promised to pay it back, then vanished. And worse than the money was the silence. No calls. No apologies. No explanations. Until now. "What kind of fresh start?" Emily asked, folding her arms. "He didn't say," Linda replied. "Just a day together." Robert leaned back in his chair. He didn't trust coincidences, and he trusted sudden kindness even less. "People don't resurface like this without a reason," he said. Linda's voice softened. "Or maybe they do. Maybe he's finally ready to come home." That was Daniel's gift, hope. Even in absence, he had a way of pulling at it. The phone buzzed again. "I'll pick you up at 10. Wear something warm." Emily scoffed. He didn't even wait for an answer. Linda hesitated only a second longer before typing back. "We'll be ready." When she hit send, something tightened in her chest. Not fear exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like standing on ice and hearing it creak beneath your feet. At precisely 9:58 a.m., a black SUV pulled up outside their townhouse. It was newer than anything Daniel had ever owned. Clean. Polished. Expensive. Emily noticed it first through the living room window. "Since when does he drive something like that?" Robert didn't answer. The doorbell rang once. Sharp. Confident. Daniel stood on the porch smiling like he had never left. He was 34 now, taller than Robert remembered, leaner, dressed in a tailored coat and leather gloves. His hair was neatly cut, his beard trimmed with precision. He looked successful. Too successful. "Mom," he said warmly, opening his arms. Linda hugged him, breathing in a scent she didn't recognize. Not home. Not familiar. Something sharp and unfamiliar. "You look good," she said, holding him at arm's length. "So do you," Daniel replied smoothly, though his eyes flicked over her face as if assessing what time had taken. He turned to Robert. The smile held, but it was tighter. "Dad." Robert nodded. "Daniel." Emily didn't move. Daniel noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Still mad at me?" he asked lightly. "I moved past mad," Emily replied. "Now I'm cautious." Daniel laughed. "Fair." They piled into the SUV, the doors closing with a heavy, final sound. As Daniel pulled away from the curb, Linda glanced back at the house, a strange urge rising to memorize it, every window, every crack in the brick, as if she might not see it again. "So," Robert said, breaking the silence. "Where are we going?" Daniel's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. "Somewhere meaningful," he said. "Somewhere that reminds us who we used to be." Emily frowned. "That's vague." Daniel smiled. "Trust me." The SUV turned onto Lakeshore Drive, the city stretching wide and gray ahead of them. Snowflakes began to fall, soft at first, then thicker, blurring the skyline. Linda clasped her hands together in her lap, trying to quiet the unease rising in her chest. This was supposed to be a gift. A healing. A family reunited. But as Daniel drove on without explaining, without checking if they were comfortable or willing, a chilling thought crossed her mind. This day wasn't for them. It was for him. And whatever redemption Daniel was seeking, it came with a destination none of them had agreed to, yet all of them were already heading toward. The SUV cut through Chicago's winter streets with steady confidence, its tires humming against slush-coated asphalt. Inside, the air felt sealed, too warm, too quiet, like a room where words had learned to hide. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel, relaxed, almost casual, as if he hadn't vanished from their lives for 3 long years. Linda studied him from the back seat. The familiar curve of his jaw was there, but something else had replaced the softness she remembered. There was a sharpness now, a vigilance behind his eyes that never quite settled. This was not the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch with the television humming. This was someone who had learned how to survive without them. "So," Daniel said, breaking the silence, "how's everyone been?" Emily let out a short breath. "You disappear for years and start with small talk?" Daniel smiled in the mirror. "I'm easing us in." "Easing us into what?" she replied. Linda reached out, placing a calming hand on Emily's arm. "Your brother is trying," she said gently. "Trying would have been calling," Emily snapped. "Trying would have been explaining." Daniel's knuckles tightened briefly on the steering wheel before he relaxed again. "I know I hurt you," he said. "All of you. But I can't undo the past. I can only show you who I am now." Robert shifted in his seat. "And who exactly is that?" Daniel hesitated just a second too long. "Someone who's done running." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Funny. You're still driving." The tension thickened, settling between them like fog. Linda watched it with quiet dread. This was what she had feared, not an explosion, but the slow resurfacing of wounds she had spent years pretending were healed. They hadn't always been like this. Before Daniel left, the Foster family had been ordinary. Loud dinners. Teasing arguments. Robert working long hours as a facilities manager. Linda volunteering at church, insisting on family breakfasts even when no one wanted eggs. Emily had been the responsible one, already carving out a stable career in marketing, while Daniel chased ideas, apps, startups, partnerships that never quite materialized. It was the money that broke them. Daniel had come to Robert late one night, eyes alight with confidence, pitching an investment opportunity that promised fast returns. Robert had hesitated, but Linda had believed in her son. "Everyone deserves one big chance," she had said. The chance had vanished along with the money. So had Daniel. "I paid off the debt," Daniel said suddenly, as if he could hear their thoughts. Robert looked up sharply. "What debt?" "The money I took," Daniel replied calmly. "Every cent." Emily twisted in her seat. "Since when?" "Last year." Linda's heart jumped. "Why didn't you tell us?" Daniel shrugged. "Because you weren't ready to hear from me." Robert's voice was low. "Or because you didn't want to face us." Daniel met his gaze in the mirror. "That too." For a moment, no one spoke. The city slipped by, closed storefronts, bare trees, a line of pedestrians bundled against the cold. Linda broke the silence. "Where have you been, Daniel?" "Really?" He exhaled slowly. "Learning." Emily scoffed. "Learning what?" "How fragile everything is," he replied. "How fast people turn on you when you fail." Robert frowned. "We didn't turn on you." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. It felt that way. Linda felt a familiar ache. The truth sat somewhere between them, heavy and unresolved. They had been hurt. So had he. And no one had known how to bridge the distance. The SUV slowed near a red light. A group of teenagers crossed the street, laughing, careless, their breath fogging the air. Emily watched them, a strange sadness settling over her. Once, that had been them. Before adulthood sharpened everything into edges. "You look different," Emily said quietly. "Not just older." Daniel glanced at her. "Different how?" "Harder," she replied. "Like you're bracing for something." Daniel's smile flickered. "Maybe I am." Linda's fingers tightened around her purse. "Daniel, if this day is about clearing the air, then we need honesty. Not riddles." He nodded slowly. "You'll have it." All of it. The SUV turned off the main road, heading into a quieter stretch near the outskirts of the city. The buildings thinned, replaced by industrial lots and long, empty sidewalks dusted with snow. Emily leaned forward. This doesn't look like anywhere meaningful. Daniel chuckled softly. That's because you're thinking emotionally. Robert's unease deepened. Then how are you thinking? Practically, Daniel replied. Linda exchanged a glance with Robert. She tried to remind herself that this was her son. The child she had rocked to sleep. The boy who had once cried when he thought he'd lost her in a grocery store. But as the SUV pressed deeper into unfamiliar territory, that memory felt distant, like a photograph fading at the edges. Emily broke the silence again. You know trust doesn't reset just because you show up in a nice car. Daniel nodded. I know. That's why I'm not asking for it. Then what are you asking for? Robert said. Daniel's voice was calm, almost gentle. Just your time. Today. The light turned green. He drove on. Linda swallowed, her unease growing heavier with every mile. Old scars were reopening, not with pain, but with questions. And she couldn't shake the sense that Daniel wasn't bringing them together to heal the past, but to finally confront something he had been carrying alone. Something that had waited patiently for Boxing Day. The snow began to fall harder as they moved farther from the familiar heart of Chicago. What had started as a soft drift thickened into a steady curtain, blurring street signs and muting the city's usual noise. The SUV's windshield wipers worked rhythmically, their dull thrum the only sound breaking the silence. Linda watched the landscape change. Coffee shops and corner stores gave way to long, empty blocks and warehouses half buried in snow. This wasn't a scenic drive. It felt deliberate, calculated, as though Daniel had memorized every turn long before he picked them up. Are we still in Chicago? Emily asked, half joking. Daniel smiled faintly. Technically. That answer did nothing to settle her nerves. Robert shifted again, adjusting his coat. You're taking us pretty far for a family outing. I wanted privacy, Daniel replied. Some conversations don't belong in crowded places. Linda glanced at her husband. Privacy sounded reasonable. It always did, until it didn't. They passed a shuttered factory with broken windows, the brick darkened by decades of soot. A faded sign clung to the wall, its letters barely legible beneath peeling paint. Emily stared at it, an uncomfortable memory surfacing. Do you remember when we used to drive past places like this? She said. You'd make up stories about who worked there. Daniel chuckled softly. I said it was a secret lab. You said they made fake money, she replied. Dad told you to stop. Robert allowed himself a small smile. You were always imaginative. The moment almost felt normal. Almost. Then Daniel turned down a narrow side road that wasn't plowed as thoroughly as the others. The tires crunched through thicker snow, and the SUV slowed. Linda's hand tightened on the seat. Is everything okay? Perfectly, Daniel said. Just a shortcut. Emily frowned. Shortcuts are usually longer in the winter. Daniel didn't answer. The road opened into an industrial stretch that looked abandoned, chain-link fences, unlit lots, and buildings standing like silent witnesses to forgotten years. The snow absorbed sound so completely that even the engine seemed muted. Emily leaned forward. Daniel, where exactly are we going? He hesitated. Somewhere from my past. Robert's brow furrowed. You've been gone for years. Which past? Daniel met his eyes in the mirror. The one I never told you about. Linda's stomach tightened. She had sensed this coming, and unburdening, perhaps. She had hoped it would come over dinner, not in a place that felt so removed from the world. They stopped briefly at a red light, the only car in sight. Daniel tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, a subtle rhythm that Linda had seen before, his tell when he was nervous. You don't have to do this, she said gently. Whatever it is. Daniel exhaled. I do. I really do. The light turned green. As they drove on, Emily noticed something that made her heart skip. Daniel, why do you have a dash cam? Linda followed her gaze. A small black device blinked steadily on the windshield. Daniel didn't look away from the road. Insurance. On a family outing? Emily pressed. On a winter drive, he replied calmly. Anything can happen. Robert crossed his arms. You didn't used to be this cautious. Daniel smiled thinly. I learned the hard way. They turned again, this time into a large, empty parking lot dusted with snow. Tire tracks crisscrossed the ground, but there were no cars in sight. The surrounding buildings loomed, dark and silent. Linda's pulse quickened. Daniel, why are we stopping? He parked the SUV and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. For honesty, he said quietly. Emily's voice sharpened. This isn't funny. I'm not joking, Daniel replied. He turned in his seat to face them fully for the first time. Up close, Linda saw it clearly now, the tension beneath his calm, the strain around his eyes. Whatever he had planned, it wasn't casual. You all think you know why I left, Daniel began. You think it was about money, pride, failure. Robert said nothing. But that wasn't the real reason, Daniel continued. That was just the part one let you see. Emily shook her head. Then say it. Say the rest. Daniel paused, swallowing. Because I was afraid. Of what? Linda asked softly. Of becoming you, he said, looking at Robert. The words landed hard. Robert stiffened. Excuse me? I watched you work yourself into the ground, Daniel said. Decades of routine. No escape. No control. And I panicked. I thought if I stayed, I'd disappear into that life. Linda's eyes filled with tears. We gave you everything. I know, Daniel said. And that made it worse. Emily leaned back, arms crossed. So you stole from us? I borrowed, he corrected. And I paid it back. Without telling us, she snapped. Daniel nodded. Because this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closure. Linda's unease grew heavier. Daniel, closure doesn't happen like this. He looked past her, toward the empty buildings. It does for me. A sudden gust of wind rocked the SUV slightly, sending snow swirling across the windshield. Linda flinched. Why here? Robert asked. Daniel's gaze hardened. Because this is where everything started. Emily's breath caught. Started how? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit his face in the dim interior. I need you all to understand something, he said slowly. By the end of today, nothing about our family will be the same. Linda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. You brought us here to say that? Emily asked. Daniel met her eyes. I brought you here because the truth doesn't survive comfort. Outside, the snow fell thicker, sealing them into the moment. The city felt impossibly far away, as though Chicago itself had turned its back. Linda's heart pounded as a single thought echoed in her mind. This outing was never about reconciliation. It was about confession. And confessions, she knew, had consequences that no one ever walked away from unchanged. The silence after Daniel's words pressed in on them, thick and suffocating. Snow continued to fall outside the SUV, soft but relentless, blurring the edges of the abandoned buildings until they looked like shadows of something once alive. Linda felt trapped in a moment that refused to move forward, as if time itself had paused to listen. This isn't fair, she said finally, her voice trembling. You don't bring your family out here just to unsettle them. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time since morning, his confidence wavered. I didn't mean to scare you. Then why do I feel like we're waiting for something to happen? Emily shot back. Daniel inhaled slowly. Because you are. Robert's patience snapped. Enough, he said firmly. If you have something to say, you say it. Right now. Or we leave. Daniel glanced toward the windshield, watching snowflakes melt against the glass. You can't leave yet. The word sent a jolt through the SUV. Emily's head snapped toward him. What do you mean, we can't? Daniel's lips parted, then pressed together again. I mean, please don't. Not until you hear me out. Robert leaned forward, his voice cold. You don't get to decide that. Linda reached for Robert's arm, trying to slow the escalation. Let him talk, she whispered. We came this far. Emily stared at her mother in disbelief. Mom. Please, Linda insisted. Just for a few minutes. Reluctantly, Robert settled back, though his jaw remained clenched. 5 minutes, he said. Then we're done. Daniel nodded. That's all I need. He stepped out of the SUV, the cold rushing in before he closed the door behind him. Emily watched him through the window, her heart pounding. Something about the way he stood there, still, deliberate, made her skin crawl. Why did he get out? She muttered. Linda didn't answer. She was too busy watching Daniel walk slowly to the front of the vehicle, his boots crunching in the snow. He rested his hands on the hood, head bowed, as if gathering himself. This is theatrical, Emily said. He's doing this on purpose. Robert didn't disagree. After a moment, Daniel returned and climbed back into the driver's seat. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his breath visible in the air. He looked calmer, resolved. Thank you, he said. For staying. Linda swallowed. Daniel, what happened to you after you left? He hesitated. I fell in with people who saw opportunity where others saw failure. Emily's eyes narrowed. That sounds like trouble. It was, Daniel admitted. But it also showed me something important. Robert crossed his arms. Which is? That trust is currency, Daniel said quietly. And I spent yours recklessly. Linda felt tears prick her eyes. We trusted you because you're our son. Daniel nodded. I know. And that's why this is so hard. Emily leaned forward. You keep talking like this is some confession booth. What aren't you telling us? Daniel's gaze flicked to her, then away. I didn't just borrow money from Dad. Robert stiffened. What? There were others, Daniel continued. Friends. Associates. People who didn't take loss lightly. Linda's heart sank. Are you saying you're in danger? Daniel smiled faintly. Not anymore. Emily's voice rose. That's not reassuring. I cleared my debts, Daniel said. But clearing debts doesn't erase consequences. Robert's eyes hardened. So why bring us here? Daniel met his gaze. Because you were part of the story. Whether you knew it or not. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. You used us? No, Daniel said quickly. I protected you. By lying, she snapped. Yes, he replied simply. The honesty stunned her into silence. Linda shook her head slowly. You don't protect people by taking away their choices. Daniel looked at her, pain flickering across his face. I thought I was sparing you. Robert leaned forward again. From what? Daniel opened his mouth, then froze. A distant sound cut through the stillness. The low crunch of tires on snow. Emily's head whipped toward the side window. We're not alone. Daniel's shoulders tensed. He glanced toward the sound, his jaw tightening. Linda's breath caught. Daniel? It's nothing, he said too quickly. The sound grew louder. Another vehicle emerged from behind one of the warehouses, its headlights slicing through the falling snow. Emily's pulse raced. You said you wanted privacy. Daniel's voice dropped. Plans change. Robert reached for the door handle. We're leaving. Daniel's hand shot out, gripping Robert's wrist. No. The touch was brief, but firm. Emily shouted, let him go. Daniel released him immediately, raising his hands. I'm sorry. We need to stay calm. Linda's heart hammered in her chest. Who is that? Daniel didn't answer. The other vehicle slowed, stopping several yards away. Its engine idled, a low, ominous hum. Emily's mind raced. Is this about those people you mentioned? Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the windshield. I didn't expect them today. Robert's voice was tight. Then why does it feel like you did? The SUV's interior felt smaller, the air heavier. Outside, the snow continued to fall, indifferent to their fear. Linda clutched her purse, her thoughts spiraling. This was the crack, the moment when a strange outing tipped into something darker. She looked at Daniel, at the son she thought she knew, and realized with chilling clarity. Whatever he had brought them here for was no longer under his control. And whatever was coming next would not be resolved with words alone. The headlights from the other vehicle cut through the snowfall like a blade, steady and unhurried. It didn't rush them. It didn't need to. The confidence in that slow approach was unmistakable, and deeply unsettling. Linda's hands trembled as she tightened her grip on her purse. Daniel, she whispered, tell us what's happening. Daniel didn't answer right away. His eyes followed the shape of the vehicle through the windshield, his breathing measured, controlled. He looked less like a man surprised by danger and more like someone watching a delayed consequence finally arrive. Emily broke first. You said you cleared your debts. You said this was over. Daniel nodded. It is. Mostly. Robert's voice was low and furious. Mostly doesn't bring strangers into empty parking lots. The other vehicle stopped. Its headlights stayed on. No one got out. Daniel turned the engine back on, just enough to warm the cabin. "I need you to listen carefully," he said. "And I need you not to interrupt." Emily scoffed. "You lost that, right?" "Please," Linda said, her voice cracking. "Just listen." Daniel met her eyes, guilt flickering across his face. "I didn't bring you here to put you in danger," he said. "I brought you here because this is where the truth ends." "That doesn't make sense," Robert said. "It will," Daniel replied. He exhaled slowly. "When I left, it wasn't just because of fear or money. I was being watched." Emily's stomach dropped. "By who?" "People who saw potential in me," Daniel said. "And leverage in my family." Linda felt cold all over. "Leverage?" Daniel nodded. "They knew where I came from. They knew I'd do anything to protect you." Robert slammed his hand against the seat. "You involved us without telling us?" "I involved myself," Daniel shot back. "You were already involved by being my family." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "So what, we were insurance?" Daniel winced. "No. You were motivation." The other vehicle's engine revved slightly, as if on cue. Linda's voice shook. "Daniel, what did you do?" He looked away. "I moved money. Not just borrowed it. Laundered it." The word hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Emily felt dizzy. "You committed crimes." "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "And I paid for it." Robert's eyes burned. "Did you put our names on anything?" "No," Daniel replied quickly. "Never. I drew the line there." Emily laughed bitterly. "How generous." Daniel swallowed. "I was trapped. Every time I tried to walk away, they reminded me what I stood to lose." Linda felt tears spill over. "Why didn't you come to us?" "Because they warned me not to," Daniel said. "And because I thought I could fix it." Robert shook his head. "You don't fix criminal organizations by yourself." "I did," Daniel replied. Emily stared at him. "Then why are they here?" Daniel finally turned to face them fully. "Because one of them doesn't believe I did." Silence crashed down harder than any shout. Linda's breath came shallow. "Daniel, what are you saying?" "I made a deal," he said. "I paid them back with interest. I gave them everything they wanted." "Everything?" Robert asked. Daniel hesitated. Emily's voice sharpened. "What did you give them?" Daniel closed his eyes. "Information." Linda's heart skipped. "About what?" "About people," Daniel said. "Routes. Schedules. Vulnerabilities." Emily exploded. "You sold people out?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "I sold data. No names. No faces." Robert stood halfway out of his seat. "You don't get to decide how that ends." Daniel's voice cracked. "I know." The vehicle outside finally shut off its engine. A door opened. One figure stepped out, tall, bundled in a dark coat, face obscured by shadow and snow. Emily felt panic claw up her throat. "They're coming here." Daniel nodded. "This is the part one hoped to avoid." Linda grabbed his arm. "Avoid how?" "By ending it," Daniel said. Robert froze. "Ending what?" Daniel reached into his coat slowly, carefully. Emily screamed, "Daniel, don't." He pulled out a thick envelope and held it up. "Proof," he said. "Bank records. Transactions. Everything." Robert's eyes widened. "Why do you have that?" "Because I never trusted them," Daniel replied. "And I never trusted myself." The figure outside began walking toward them, footsteps crunching steadily in the snow. Linda's voice broke. "Then why bring us here?" Daniel looked at her, tears finally filling his eyes. "Because I needed witnesses." Emily stared at him in horror. "Witnesses to what?" "To the truth," Daniel said. "To who I really am." Robert's voice was raw. "You could have mailed that. You could have gone to the police." Daniel shook his head. "Not safely. Not without collateral." Emily's breath caught. "We're the collateral." Daniel looked devastated. "You were never supposed to be." The figure stopped a few feet from the SUV. A knock sounded against the driver's window, slow, deliberate. Linda screamed. Daniel didn't move. "Daniel Foster," a man's voice called through the glass, calm and cold. "We need to talk." Daniel leaned forward, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. "This is it," he whispered. "No more running." Emily shook violently. Open the doors. Drive away. Daniel looked back at her, his expression hollow. If I do, this follows you. Forever. Robert's voice trembled with rage and fear. And if you don't? Daniel met his eyes. It ends with me. The knock came again, louder this time. Linda realized then, the most devastating truth of all. Daniel hadn't brought them here to confess. He had brought them here to say goodbye. The knock on the window echoed inside the SUV like a gunshot. Linda flinched violently, her scream cutting off into a sob as Daniel straightened in his seat. The man outside didn't knock again. He waited. That patience was somehow worse, calculated, predatory. Robert's instincts kicked in. Daniel, unlock the doors, he said, his voice firm but shaking. Now. Daniel didn't move. Unlock them. Emily shouted. Daniel turned to them slowly, his face pale but composed, like someone who had already crossed an invisible line. If I do that, he said quietly, you'll never be free of this. Emily laughed hysterically. We're not free now. The man outside leaned closer to the window, peering in. His face was still obscured by shadow, but his posture radiated authority, someone accustomed to being obeyed. Daniel, the man said calmly, you didn't mention company. Daniel swallowed. They're not part of this. The man smiled faintly. Everyone's part of this. Linda felt her chest tighten. Daniel, you promised to protect us. I am, he said hoarsely. Robert snapped. By trapping us with criminals? Daniel flinched at the word but didn't deny it. The man tapped the glass with one finger. Time's expensive, he said. Step out. Daniel hesitated. Emily grabbed his arm. Don't you dare. Daniel looked at her, really looked, and something broke in his expression. You were always the brave one, he murmured. Daniel, Linda pleaded, tears streaming freely now. Please. Whatever you're planning, stop. Daniel shook his head slowly. I can't. He reached for the door handle. Robert lunged forward, gripping his shoulder. You step out of this car and everything changes. Daniel met his father's eyes, pain etched deep into his face. Everything already has. He gently removed Robert's hand and opened the door. The cold rushed in, sharp and unforgiving. Snowflakes clung to Daniel's coat as he stepped out, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. Emily slammed her fists against the window. Daniel. Linda felt like she couldn't breathe. Outside, Daniel stood facing the man, their silhouettes framed by falling snow and harsh headlights. They spoke quietly at first, their voices muffled, words indistinct. Linda strained to read Daniel's body language, his stiff shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. Then the man laughed. It was a short, humorless sound that made Emily's blood run cold. Daniel shook his head. He gestured toward the SUV, toward his family. The man followed his gaze and smiled again, this time wider. That's leverage, the man said, his voice carrying clearly now. You always did understand value. Emily's stomach twisted. What is he saying? Robert clenched his fists. He's reminding Daniel who's in control. Outside, the man reached into his coat slowly. Linda screamed again, convinced she was about to watch her son die. But instead, he pulled out a phone. He held it up, showing Daniel something on the screen. Daniel's knees buckled slightly. What did he show you? Emily whispered frantically. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, panic finally breaking through his composure. You weren't supposed to do that, he said. The man shrugged. Insurance. Robert's heart sank. Daniel, what is it? Daniel turned toward the SUV, his face ashen. They know where you live. Linda's scream tore through the cabin. Emily shook her head violently. No. No, no, no. I told them never to involve you, Daniel shouted at the man. That was the deal. And deals change, the man replied coolly. Just like plans. Daniel's voice cracked. You said this would end. It can, the man said. If you finish what you started. Emily's breathing became erratic. Finish what? Daniel turned back toward the car, his eyes locking onto Linda's. In that moment, she understood something that hollowed her out completely. Daniel wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of surviving. They want the files, Daniel said loudly enough for them to hear. And they want them destroyed. Robert's mind raced. The envelope. Daniel nodded. The only thing keeping you safe. Emily stared at him. Then don't give it to them. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. If I don't, they won't stop. The man took a step closer. Decide. Daniel looked between the man and his family, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Snow gathered on his shoulders, melting slowly, like time slipping away. I thought if I controlled the moment, Daniel said, his voice breaking, I could control the damage. Linda pressed her forehead to the glass, sobbing. We don't want your control. We want our son. Daniel closed his eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope. Emily screamed, Don't. Daniel hesitated, just long enough for hope to flare. Then he held it out. The man took it, opening it briefly, scanning the contents. His smile widened. Smart, he said. Using family as motivation. Emily felt something inside her snap. You used us. Daniel looked at her, tears streaming down his face. I let them think they were. The man laughed again. Either way, it worked. He tucked the envelope into his coat. You did well, Daniel. You always were the responsible one. Responsible. The word cut deeper than any insult. The man turned back toward his vehicle. This never happened, he said. And if I hear otherwise? He didn't finish the sentence. As he walked away, Daniel stood frozen, staring at the snow-covered ground. Linda pounded on the window. Daniel. Come back. Slowly, Daniel turned. His face was empty now. Hollow. He walked back to the SUV, opened the door, and climbed inside. Emily grabbed him, shaking. What did you do? Daniel stared straight ahead. I chose. Robert's voice was low and deadly calm. And what did that choice cost us? Daniel swallowed hard. Everything, he whispered. Outside, the other vehicle drove away, its taillights disappearing into the falling snow. But Linda knew with terrifying certainty. Just because it left, didn't mean it was over. The SUV sat motionless long after the other vehicle vanished, its red taillights swallowed by the snowfall. The silence that followed was not relief, it was aftermath. The kind that settles after something irreversible has already happened. Emily was the first to speak. Her voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Drive. Daniel didn't respond. Drive, she screamed, striking his chest with her fists. Get us out of here. Daniel's hands rested on the steering wheel, white-knuckled, unmoving. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, glassy, distant, like a man already somewhere else. Robert leaned forward, gripping Daniel's shoulder hard. Son. Look at me. Daniel didn't. Linda felt a sharp, rising panic. Daniel, she whispered, then louder, Daniel. Finally, he blinked. Slowly. As if waking from a dream he hadn't survived. I can't, he said. Emily froze. What do you mean, you can't? Daniel swallowed, his throat bobbing. If I move, if we go back, this doesn't end. Robert's patience exploded. You don't get to decide that anymore. Daniel flinched at the anger, but his voice remained eerily calm. I already did. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, sudden and jarring. Linda gasped, relief flooding her chest, until Daniel shifted the gear not into drive, but into park again. What are you doing? Emily demanded. Daniel exhaled shakily. I thought giving them the files would be enough. Robert's heart sank. You thought? Daniel finally turned to face them. His eyes were wet now, red-rimmed and hollow. They don't want silence, he said. They want certainty. Linda's blood ran cold. Certainty of what? That I won't talk, Daniel replied. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. Daniel, what did you agree to? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the center console. Robert saw the movement and reacted instantly. Stop. Daniel pulled out a small black object. Emily screamed. No, 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 no. It wasn't a gun. It was worse. A compact knife, sleek and deliberate, its blade catching the dim light inside the SUV. Linda's scream tore through the cabin. Daniel. Put that down. Daniel's hand trembled. I never meant for you to see this. Emily grabbed his wrist with both hands. You are not doing this. Not here. Not today. Daniel looked at her then, really looked, and something in his face shattered completely. I'm so tired, he whispered. Robert lunged forward, grabbing Daniel's arm. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "Whatever they told you is a lie. There is always another way." Daniel shook his head weakly. "Not for me." Emily sobbed. "You're choosing them over us." Daniel cried openly now. "I'm choosing you." The struggle intensified, hands grabbing, voices overlapping, panic spiraling out of control. The knife slipped, clattering against the dashboard. Linda reached for it instinctively, tossing it into the back seat, her heart racing. "No!" Daniel shouted, desperation flooding his voice. "You don't understand." "Then explain." Emily screamed. Daniel broke down completely. "They're watching," he said. "Not just us. Everyone. Phones. Cameras. Neighbors. If I disappear quietly, it ends. If I don't, it follows you forever." Robert stared at him in horror. "You think dying fixes this?" Daniel laughed, a broken, cracked sound. "It fixes me." Emily collapsed back into her seat, sobbing uncontrollably. "This is insane." Daniel's breathing became erratic. His hands clawed at his chest as if he couldn't get enough air. Linda saw it then, the panic attack, full force. "Daniel," she said urgently. "Look at me. Breathe. You're here. You're safe." He shook his head violently. "I'm not." Suddenly, headlights flared again at the edge of the lot. Emily screamed. Another car. Different angle. Different approach. Robert's stomach dropped. "They're back." Daniel froze, terror overtaking him completely now. "No," he whispered. "They said this was over." The vehicle didn't stop. It accelerated. "Daniel, drive." Linda screamed. The SUV lurched forward just as the other car slammed into the rear quarter panel, metal screaming against metal. Emily was thrown sideways, her head striking the window. Linda cried out as her seatbelt dug into her shoulder. Robert braced himself instinctively, shouting, "Hold on." Daniel fought the wheel, panic overtaking precision. Snow, ice, and shock made the SUV skid wildly. The second car backed up, then rammed them again. This time harder. Glass shattered. Emily screamed in pain, clutching her arm. Linda tasted blood. "Stop!" Daniel yelled, slamming the brakes. "Stop!" The other car finally pulled back, its headlights glaring like eyes. A door opened. A figure stepped out. Robert's voice was filled with raw terror. "Daniel, they're going to kill us." Daniel's face went slack. Something inside him finally broke, not fear, not guilt, but resolve. "No," he said quietly. He turned the wheel sharply, slammed the accelerator, and sent the SUV spinning toward a concrete barrier at the edge of the lot. "Daniel!" Linda screamed. Emily reached for him. "Please!" Robert shouted, "Don't!" The world tilted violently. Impact came like thunder. Metal crushed. Glass exploded. Sound vanished into a ringing void. And then, nothing. When the SUV finally stilled, snow drifted down through shattered windows, settling softly over twisted steel and broken silence. Daniel slumped forward, motionless. Linda's vision blurred as pain radiated through her body. She turned her head, desperate. "Emily." "Robert." Emily groaned weakly. Robert coughed, blood on his lips, but alive. Daniel did not move. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder with every second. Boxing Day, meant for reconciliation and hope, had ended in wreckage and blood. And as Linda stared at her son's still form, a single, devastating truth settled over her. Daniel had always planned for this day to end exactly this way. Not as an accident, but as an escape. Snow continued to fall long after the sirens arrived, settling gently over twisted metal and shattered glass as if trying to soften what could never be softened. Red and blue lights cut through the white haze, reflecting off the wreckage like cruel ornaments on a broken holiday. Linda drifted in and out of consciousness as paramedics worked frantically around her. Every sound felt distant, muffled voices, boots crunching in snow, radios crackling with coded urgency. Her shoulder burned, her head throbbed, but none of it compared to the hollow ache in her chest. "Ma'am, stay with me," a voice said firmly. She turned her head weakly, eyes searching past the chaos. Daniel. He was still slumped forward in the driver's seat, unmoving. His face was pale, strangely peaceful, as if sleep had finally claimed him after years of exhaustion. "No," Linda whispered. "Please. A paramedic gently placed a hand on her arm. "We need to get you out." They cut her seatbelt, easing her onto a stretcher. As they wheeled her past the SUV, she reached out instinctively, fingers brushing Daniel's coat one last time. "Cold." Emily was screaming somewhere nearby, her voice raw with pain and disbelief. Robert sat on the curb, head in his hands, blood streaking down his face as an officer spoke quietly to him. Daniel never opened his eyes. The days that followed blurred into one long, aching silence. Daniel was pronounced dead at the hospital. Cause of death: traumatic injuries sustained in the crash. Officially, it was ruled an accident. Unofficially, no one in the Foster family would ever call it that. Emily's arm was fractured, her concussion severe. Robert suffered broken ribs and internal bruising. Linda's injuries healed the slowest, not because they were the worst, but because they were the quietest. Detectives asked questions. Lots of them. Why had they been in that location? Why had there been another vehicle involved? Why had Daniel been so distressed? The envelope was never recovered. No files. No records. No proof. The dashcam had been destroyed in the crash. Without evidence, the case stalled. The other vehicle was never identified. And just like that, the thread Daniel feared vanished, at least on paper. The funeral was small. Closed casket. No eulogies. No explanations. Just a name etched into stone: Daniel Foster. Beloved son. Linda stood frozen beside the grave, unable to cry. The word beloved felt heavy, complicated, almost cruel. Beloved people didn't leave their families with unanswered questions and shattered lives. Or did they? Emily didn't speak to anyone for weeks. When she did, it was only in clipped sentences, her voice stripped of warmth. She couldn't forgive Daniel, not for the danger, not for the lies, not for making her a witness to his final choice. "He didn't have the right," she said once, her eyes hard. "He made us part of his ending without our consent." Robert said nothing. He returned to work too soon, burying himself in routine like a man afraid of stillness. Some nights, Linda found him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing, his jaw clenched as if holding back words he would never speak aloud. Daniel's name became unspoken in their house. Not forbidden, but avoided. As if saying it might invite something back. Weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address. Linda's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. "Your son kept his word." Nothing more. No signature. Emily burned the letter without a word. Robert watched the ashes fall, his face unreadable. Linda finally cried that night, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her to the core. Not just for Daniel, but for the boy he had been before fear and secrets consumed him. She wondered how long he had carried the weight alone. How many chances he had wanted to turn back. How many times he had chosen silence instead. Years passed. Chicago moved on. The warehouses were demolished. New developments rose where the parking lot once stood. Families drove past the place without knowing what had ended there. But the Fosters never fully healed. Emily eventually moved away, unable to stay in a city that echoed with memories. Robert retired early, his body fine but his spirit worn thin. Linda stayed. Every Boxing Day, she woke before dawn and sat quietly with her coffee, staring out at the snow-covered street. She thought of the text message. "We deserve a fresh start." Daniel had been right about one thing. That day had changed everything. But not in the way he intended. Because while Daniel believed sacrifice would erase his past, all it truly did was transfer the weight of his secrets onto the people who loved him most. And in the end, the greatest tragedy wasn't his death. It was the silence he left behind. A silence heavy with questions that would never be answered. And a name that, once spoken with pride and hope, now lived only in memory, too painful to say aloud, yet impossible to forget.